They are handing out a manager's amendment.
Yeah, just say the amendment also.
The manager amendment makes technical and clarifying changes to the bill. The amendment also incorporates several provisions that were brought to the committee's attention after the bill was introduced, as well as including provisions that some members of the committee have proposed as amendments. So I urge all members to support the amendment.
And then you can just go to the next page and ask if anyone wants to be recognized.
Do any members wish to be recognized on the manager's amendment? Mr. Lipinski is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the manager's amendment. I want to thank you, Chair of the subcommittee, ranking members of the full and subcommittee for this bill and for including a couple of my amendments in the manager's package. My friend Congressman Duncan and I are co-chairs of the Clean Water Caucus and are committed to finding reasonable and balanced approaches to water resources development. Often cities and towns have developed their own stormwater and water supply plans to help them adjust to challenges and prepare for the future. Water storage, aquifer recharge, and water resource reuse are all methods that communities use to address local water supply and water quality conditions. Our amendment and a manager's amendment requires the Corps of Engineers to coordinate with communities in the watershed to determine if there are local or regional water management plans in the area that could be affected by the work of the Corps during its feasibility studies. The Corps can then work with the non-federal sponsor and the surrounding communities to determine if a mutually beneficial water management plan can be developed. A more holistic approach to these projects will ensure that infrastructure investments have the best possible outcomes for the region. The other amendment simply provides transparency in the Corps' direct procurement. This amendment improves Section 213 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1992. That bill not only required the Corps of Engineers to implement certain Buy American requirements, it also required them to report on the procurement of foreign goods and supplies. Unfortunately, it does not appear that those reports are routinely being made. American taxpayers deserve to know how their money is being spent, and this amendment will give a valuable source of information to U.S. manufacturers and contractors who can review procurement trends to determine how they can work to meet the needs of the Corps and thus help the American economy more. I thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for supporting these amendments, including them in the package. This is a good bill that authorizes a series of much-needed infrastructure projects across the country, and I am pleased that we are keeping to the tradition of a 2-year WRDA cycle. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I look forward to the bill's passage, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Napolitano is recognized to speak on the manager's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for including a modified version of my amendment and Mr. Cabello's amendment that would extend 2 years, for 2 years through 2020, the authorization of Section 2106 of WRDA 14 that allows the donor and energy transfer harbors to use funds for expanded uses of berth dredging, environmental remediation dredging, and rebate to shippers. This modified amendment also provides the possibility for further extension of this authorization to 2025 if the WRDA 14 HMT funding targets are met. While I appreciate the acceptance of this modest provision to help donor ports, I am concerned that we should be doing a lot more to address donor port equity, and hope you will work with me on these issues as the bill moves forward. Donor ports continue to lose cargo to Canada, to Mexico, and domestic ports because of the overwhelming amount of taxes that donor ports collect to the benefit of the rest of the nation. Mr. Chairman, according to Customs and Border Protection, the Army Corps Work Plan, in the last 5 years, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have collected $1.3 billion in harbor maintenance taxes and have received $18 million in harbor maintenance expenditures. Let me repeat, my region has paid $1.3 billion in taxes and received $18 million. That is 1.3% return on taxes collected, 1.3. In 2015 alone, ports of New Jersey and New York collected $158 million, received back 46. Miami collected $18 million, received none. Seattle and Tacoma collected $38 million, received $1.5 million back. This is a theft of taxes from donor port regions for the benefit of the rest of the nation. And I do challenge any member of Congress to think that a 1% return on taxes collected would be acceptable in their region. What is further troubling is that the taxes collected in donor port regions go to improvement our harbors of our competitors. That is as if the government taxed McDonald's to bigger Burger Kings. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit letters of concern over the lack of donor equity in this bill from the American Port Association authorities, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the California Association of Port Authorities, and the Port of Los Angeles. I hope you and members of this committee will work with the donor community as the bill moves forward to address this fundamental fairness issue. We should be directing more funds to donor ports, improving upon Section 21 and 6, and adding additional in-water use. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Are there amendments to the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry.
just
Sorry,
to be
one
brief.
second. Ms. Edwards wanted to be recognized. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the hard work of the chairman and ranking members on the underlying bill. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Army Corps of Engineers was in front of our committee, and one of the things that we heard from them about the non-federal projects is, one, we could see that there are fewer of them under this new process. I think that's a combination both of the fact that we are no longer able to do earmarks, but also because we've set in place a process which I support that makes sure that we clear up the projects that are already in the pipeline. But what became very clear is that there are just not enough projects in the pipeline, and particularly when it comes to non-federal projects. And so you've included in the manager's amendment, and I thank you for that, a way that we can enable the Army Corps of Engineers to reach out to local municipalities and interests to make sure that they're aware of the process, that they're clear about what has to be done, and to facilitate their at least having the knowledge to be able to submit those non-federal projects. And so a part of the manager's amendment includes a provision, Mr. Chairman, that I'm grateful that we were able to work on, that requires that the Corps provide written notice to previous and potential non-federal interest to local elected officials on an annual basis to enable them to know what the opportunities are that are available to address their water resources challenges. And I think that this will help us keep good projects in the pipeline and to enable those of us who are members to better communicate with our local elected officials and jurisdictional officials to make sure that we get those projects moving forward in a way that actually helps the work of the Army Corps. And so I just thank you very much for including the provision, and for us having the ability, even at the last minute, to listen to the testimony of the Army Corps and to what we've heard from our local jurisdictions, and include this provision in the manager's amendment. And I thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Nolan wishes to be recognized, I believe. Oh, okay. Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would recommend the manager's amendment to my colleagues. There are a number of issues that are addressed here. The extension of the current authorization for donor ports, which would have expired in 2018 to 2020, and I appreciate the cooperation of those who represent those donor ports in supporting this amendment at this time. Mr. Lipinski, who spoke earlier, it was got an amendment to help for much more integrated planning with the Corps, the states, and local sponsors. A gentleman from Minnesota has a language to deal with potential conflict on indemnification agreements between the Corps and the laws of various states. And then Ms. Edwards talking about the lack of submissions that the Corps is receiving, and a good way to get that resolved by having the Corps do more effective outreach. So all in all, I think this improves the bill. I recommend it to my colleagues.
Thank the gentleman. Are there any amendments to the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.